Grid Kids.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 9 of the Grid Kids podcast. I'm your host, as always, Nicholas Semrad. Let me start off by thanking our new sponsor of the Grid Kids podcast, Spectrasonics. These guys have made some really incredible virtual instruments such as Omnisphere, Keyscape, Trillion, and Stylus RMX, and they have single-handedly changed the way that I record. As I've probably mentioned before, I was never really a software man until trying this stuff out, and I'm telling you, it's absolutely incredible. So check them out by heading over to spectrasonics.net or to their Instagram page at spectrasonics_official. They just recently posted a bunch of live videos with my friends from Texas, RC and the Grits, that I think y'all will absolutely dig, so check it out. Regarding this week's interview, I got to chat with not only one of my favorite piano players in the world right now, but also one of the hottest names in film scoring and film composition. Our guest this episode is the incredible Mr. Kris Bowers. Not only has he played and toured with Jay-Z, Kanye West, Ludacris, and Jose James, but he's won a Daytime Emmy Award and recently did the scoring for the award-winning movie Green Book and Ava DuVernay's Netflix miniseries When They See Us. He's an absolute beast of a musician and one of the most creative writers I've heard in years. So if you're curious about his work, check those shows out as he's created some really incredible music. And now, here's my interview with Kris Bowers. We are here with my good friend, Kris Bowers. How's it going today?
Good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm completely enamored with your studio setup, and I want all of these keyboards in here.
Oh, man. Oh, thanks. I'm trying to, have a habit, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like it's a healthy one. And you are relatively newly engaged.
Yes. Yeah.
How does the wife-to-be feel about the keyboard habit?
She's actually super into it. Yeah.
That's good. I love it.
Yeah, she's totally into it.
I love it. That's amazing. So you grew up, I want to kind of inform my listeners a bit just on where you kind of started. You grew up here, right? You were in Mid-City?
I grew up in LA. Yeah, Mid-City.
Okay. And you went to school out here. You went to an arts high school, I think.
Yeah,
right?
it was called LACHSA, LA County High School for the Arts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I saw that you studied a bit under Mulgrew Miller, which is fucking amazing. Tell me about that shit.
Yeah, man. I first met him. He played at this place called the Jazz Bakery.
Yeah,
it used to be. I think they still exist, but now they do shows in different places around the city. But they used to have a location over in Culver City that I would go to pretty frequently as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I went to a show of his. It might not even have been, it was either his show or a show he was playing with Ron Carter. And I just went and talked to him afterwards. And he was like, yeah, well, I'm here for a few days. I can come by and give you a lesson if you want. And
shit.
Went to his hotel and talked to him for a while there and then drove him to my parents' house. And the coolest thing is that my entire childhood up until I was 15 or 16, I had this piano that my grandmother bought me that they got for $300 somewhere. And it was a brown piano, which I feel like all brown pianos are out of tune. And
there's one key that sticks, a really important one, middle D or something.
Yeah, exactly. And he came over to the house and just sat down and played that piano and made it sound amazing. And I was like, man, I have no excuses now.
Dude,
and
that's so rad.
And then every time he was in LA afterwards, he would come by and give me a lesson and we talked for a while and we stayed in touch. The last time I saw him was randomly at Aretha Franklin's birthday party.
Oh, wow.
And he was playing piano at it. And that was maybe a year before he passed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember hearing stories about Bill Evans being able to play. You'd hear a party and all these people would play the piano and then he would get on and just be like, oh, that piano doesn't sound like the same piano.
Yeah.
And it sounds like Mulgrew had that same kind of vibe.
Yeah, for sure. Just their touch is a huge part of their sound.
Just reacting. It's almost like reacting to the inaccuracies of the piano.
Huh. Yeah.
Knowing oh, this note kind of sucks. I need to play it softer or something.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
Really having a great relationship with it. And man, so you went to Juilliard after that, which is amazing because they only let in one piano player per year, right?
Yeah. Well, basically the way it works is they have enough players for one big band and 4 rhythm sections.
Okay.
And so that means they have 4 pianists, 4 drummers, and 4 bass players. And that's for undergrad and masters. They have a separate artist diploma program that's a separate thing. But the they only accept whatever they lose the previous year.
Oh, wow.
So there are
Okay.
times where they lose. They might have 3 pianists that graduate all one year. And so the next year they'll have 3 openings. But the year that I applied, there was only 1 piano opening. And I didn't know that when I applied, but I learned that afterwards. Yeah.
It's probably good that you didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it was like I was already stressed enough in the audition process. Yeah.
So what do they do when, like with a program like that, do you pick like a degree?
Not really. It's kind of just like performance. That's really all it is. And it's also all lumped together where they have a track that they have, required classes and all that kind of stuff. But once you get in, especially for the like small ensembles or the big band, it's all mixed. So like my ensemble, my freshman year had like a master's student in it, a senior, a junior, like it was all kind of mixed together. And also because they accept in that weird way, the year that I got accepted, I think there were maybe like 5 first-year master's students and 3 freshmen. And so there were really I only had 3 people in my class or whatever.
Yeah. And it's mainly like jazz and classical focused?
Yeah, mostly jazz. What was interesting is when I was there, they actually were like almost kind of weird about us wanting to study classical music.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, I remember I was able to take some classical piano lessons, I guess classical lessons on your instrument. They were the classical theory lessons and classical composition lessons and counterpoint or fugue writing, all that stuff is requirement. But taking classical lessons on your instrument, some of the teachers in the jazz department were a little like weird about it for some reason.
I wonder if they're trying to focus on like the improvisational stuff. Yeah,
I guess so. Which it's funny because eventually I ended up studying with Fred Hirsch, and I feel like that was the first time that I had somebody that was like, "Oh, let me help you get better at the piano, like at the instrument, more than just like, here's some more improvisatory stuff to check out, or here's some other like pianist to check out." He was more technical, which I actually kind of appreciated.
Sure. Had you done a ton of like classical focus before you went to college?
I had lessons the entire time, but I never really took it seriously.
Yeah.
Like I would practice enough to be able to play a song or two at a recital or whatever it was. But I wish I had taken it more seriously. My parents made me keep my classical piano lessons with jazz lessons up until my senior year of high school. In my senior year of high school, I only took jazz lessons. And then at Juilliard, I maybe like 3 years out of the 5 years I was there, or 6 years I was there, I had a classical teacher as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the classical thing is always interesting to me because I feel like there's either the people who like totally eschew it and kind of hate it and never do it. And that's one camp. And then there's the other camp of people that like worked on it and kind of cared. And then they get to be like 30, 40 years old and they're like, damn, I really should have. Because I'm totally that boat of like, I took 15 years of Suzuki classical and I'm like, man, if I would have tried like a little harder.
I feel you,
like, I'd be a beast. So just from hearing stuff you've done on records and the soundtrack work I've heard you do, you're very obviously influenced by things that aren't just that. Yeah. Like I can tell you've heard Bjork before. And you mentioned, I heard an interview where you mentioned that Cliff Martinez was a huge influence of you.
Yeah, definitely.
And that dude is fucking rowdy. Yeah. Like just electronic music of just like really kind of dark. And like, when did that stuff start? Did that start as kind of like a mission to be more familiar with the things you were doing? Or do you have kind of like an inherent love of it as you were coming up?
I think that stuff actually started kind of closer to college. I had like a weird musical upbringing. I feel like when I was a kid, before high school, I mainly listened to like anything that was on the radio, essentially. And when I was younger, my parents actually only let me listen to radio. Disney, like they were very like, it was a little weird in my household. And so like, and Radio Disney is all like top 40 pop music, or whatever. And then my cousin's a rapper named Murs, and so he and his brother were like 8 and 10 years older than me, and so they would like buy me like Dr. Dre albums or Snoop Dogg stuff or like that kind of stuff. So I feel like when I was a kid, I only really listened to either like stuff on the radio or hip hop music or R&B and like old like funk and soul that my parents listened to, like Stevie or Luther Vandross or Earth, Wind & Fire. And then when And I listened to a little bit of jazz, a little bit of classical, and some film scoring stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I got to high school, I really only listened to like film score music and jazz. And I was like, when I was in high school, I was like, I'm never playing any pop music. I'm never playing anything that's like not swing. Like I was, I was like the jazz police. Yeah. And
we all have that time. There's you have to have like 2 years of that in order to be able to improvise.
Yeah, exactly. It's a requirement. Yeah. And when I got to college is actually when I first started exploring all this other music that I felt like I had missed out on, and like listening to like Bjork or Radiohead or Bon Iver or Grizzly Bear or and getting into all of the people, all the film composers that were less traditional. So like when I was younger, I would listen to James Newton Howard or John Powell or Danny Elfman or Howard Shore, which not all those guys are traditional, but I mean, I think there's then that next generation of artists turned film composer are people like Trent Reznor and Cliff Martinez and like
they were less afraid of synthesizers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And their synth sounds are like so much more organic sounding, or, you know, a little bit more that synth sound I gravitated toward more than like, I mean, the stuff that they're probably influenced by, like a lot of like the 80s period stuff like Maurice Jarre or even like some of Danny Elfman stuff or like some of Hans's early scores, like that synth stuff I came to respect later. But I think when I first heard it, it was like, oh, this sounds dated. Yeah. And Cliff Martinez and Trent Reznor sounded like fresh and modern.
Yeah, it's like you can hear that shit now, and it like what was the was it Drive that Cliff Martinez did? And that was like kind of his maybe one of the more famous ones.
Yeah.
But that shit, I mean, that movie came out I think more than 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think so.
And it sounds like it came out yesterday.
Yeah, totally.
Like I hear it now, I'm like, oh, this could be any record of any like indie rocker that I listen to.
Exactly.
And like it would be absolutely. And you have, I noticed too, and I was doing my research. He gets scared, ladies and gentlemen. No, and you took, and maybe this is a more common path than I'm familiar with because I'm not as familiar with the kind of the film scoring scene, but it seems like a lot of people who are kind of like jazz players or improvisers or even on the flip side of that of people who just tour and stuff like that, those people who get into film scoring kind of do it to get out of that world of oh, this is a maybe a better living,
for sure.
Same amount of work, but I can sleep sometimes. Sometimes.
Sometimes.
But it seems like you kind of had your eye on this from a young age. Like you were, you said something about like at 12, you were like, yeah, I already know. Like this is the hang. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah, my parents were kind of a bit strange, and they like really wanted. Both of us, my brother and I, but especially with me being the older one, like wanted me to have my entire life figured out at an early age. Like they came from the upbringing or background of like, as soon as you turn 18, we're not responsible for you anymore kind of thing. And like, especially with each of their respective parents. And so they always wanted me to go to college, and they were always like, we're going to help you out with that. But they wanted me to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and really have an idea of what I was going to do, because for them, they were like, we're not going to waste our money with college. So you're not going to go to college and not know what you want to do, even though that's like the normal experience. And they just happened to luck out, and I'd happen to like obey their wishes and not be like most people. But like, so when I was younger, I started already trying to figure out how might I like envision my career or like what I would do. And the only difference is that like when I was younger, I thought that, oh yeah, when I get out of school, I'll tour with different people that I really like, and I'll tour for like maybe like the first 5 years of my career or 6 years of my career, and then like start touring with my band for another like 5 years. And I kind of didn't really see getting into film scoring until like 10 years later, essentially.
Yeah.
But I think I started touring and I was like, oh, I can't do this. Like, this is rough.
Which is, it's funny too, because I think a lot of musicians, and I had a bit of this too, but like, it's almost like you start even grindier, you know, like, I mean, because you were playing with, I mean, you were doing like the Ludacris stuff and Marcus, and I've been around Marcus's hang. I haven't toured with him, but I've seen his hang enough to where it's like, of that world, it's one of the more comfortable ones.
For sure. Yeah.
And it still sucks.
Yeah, totally. Sorry, Marcus.
No, yeah. And I'm not the gig or anything. It's just
exactly.
like that life of like, oh, I'm constantly moving. My body's constantly like going thousands of feet up in the air and back. And I'm kind of relying on whatever meals are around. It's like, that thing, even at the highest levels, like it's a little rough.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of already, like you said, was already trying to figure out how I could start pursuing the film stuff like pretty early. And I mean, all that stuff just happened to happen in the way that it did as well. Like, it wasn't like I was incredibly active with pursuing that stuff, but I was pretty vocal about it. Like, I used to just tell everybody that would listen that I wanted to be a film composer. And so like the first like 4 or maybe even more, I think maybe like 5, maybe even 6 documentaries that I did while I was on tour. And like, I mostly did those like, with Marcus, we would like, just in my hotel room or like on the bus or whatever it was. Like, I was doing most of those scores like while I was on tour.
That's amazing. Holy shit. Did you ever get to a point, I mean, it's always weird to think of, you know, we give youth a lot of this like power and respect in terms of like, oh shit, they figured out some stuff early. But I feel sometimes, and maybe this is just because of my experiences, and I'm wondering if you had any similar, where like that kind of like career focus, you know, when you're 10, 12, or even 15, 16, like gets to a point of like, you know, being a lot to think about at that age. Because there's so many like hormonal things and just like figuring out like, what do I think of girls or boys, you know, like what do I think of these other weird body things that are happening, to where I feel like, you know, it's like to kind of like say, okay, those things are happening, but man, I really got to get my career on track. Like, did you ever have any experiences where you look back and you're like, oh man, like I maybe thought, you know, that there was some like, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but like, did you ever have any like other thoughts other than positive ones, I guess? Yeah. Like, did it ever affect you, you know, at a young age?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like yes and no. I think my parents, especially my dad, kind of almost like programmed me to be like, I think a lot of those things I'm trying to actually reverse engineer now, or like all these ways that I've like intrinsically linked my self-value to like being a piano player, to like, you know, like my craft. I feel like when I was a kid, it was great because I was good at it. I was like winning competitions. And so the idea of piano being the most important thing for me, like when I was a kid, I used to ask my dad if I could go outside and play during the summer. And he'd be like, did you even touch a piano today? Like, are you really going to ask me if you can play? Like, did you? And that was always the thing. And so it became this thing where like I just knew that I wasn't even going to think about doing anything else before I like worked on the piano first. And then I eventually fell deeper in love with it. So then I was like, piano was really the thing that made me feel most comfortable, is really the only thing that I cared about. I didn't really like go out and play with friends. Like when I was in high school, I didn't like hang out with my friends unless we were like doing a gig or rehearsing or practicing or something like that. And so I never really had any negative feelings about music or about piano, unless it was like tied to my dad. And I got to a big fight about it at some point, because like he was all about competition and all about like ever from the time I was literally like 5 years old, he would always find somebody else in my class or in my school that he could be like, oh, well, you're not as good as that person. And then like, you're not practicing as much as them, obviously. And so there was a lot of like motivation that came out of this like negative, you know, kind of competitive mindset or whatever, that I think, or actually at some point we got into this argument because I was like, that's not what I care about. I care about like trying to make music, and I don't really care if I'm the most impressive or like all of that kind of stuff. And I started to, you know, people like play to get hype or whatever. And I think being around the kids in my high school and seeing how they cared about music, and it was all about like trying to get to something, or they were like checking out records and like they were trying to get better, to get closer to what they were listening to, as opposed to getting better to like be the best one, essentially. And that was kind of when I started to like at least not have that negative idea kind of drive me or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a tricky thing because I feel like I have very, they'll hate hearing this, but I have very similar parents in terms of the like, you know, we're not pushing you, but we're pushing you to kind of like do this thing. And, you know, I feel like there's so many pluses and minuses there, and they're all to the extreme. Like if I were to name you, and I'm sure this is probably the same way for you, like my biggest, like people that pushed me the hardest, a lot of that came from like a fearful place. A lot of that came from like, oh fuck, I'm gonna get fired if I don't, or like I'm not gonna be an actual musician if I don't.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But because that, like I got way better.
Yeah.
You know, and the people who couldn't handle that fear-based thing, like, I mean, to a certain extent, like aren't as good. And so it's like it sucks. And I've kind of been on this mission now. And you talked about like, you know, needing to kind of re-engineer some of these things.
Yeah.
And like and maybe you have some opinions on this, but there has to be a way to like motivate someone young into a place of like, you can get this way through a loving place and not from a fearful one. And I don't know what that is yet.
Yeah, man. Yeah, for sure. But it's something that I feel like I'm similarly trying to figure out. And even for myself, because I feel like a lot of that negative mindset or feeling negative about the craft is something that I'm feeling more now than I did before, where like, because like, I think the part of me that's like wanted to be the best or whatever it is, like, it's not the same as like when you're in school, you can objectively be viewed as the best in your school or whatever. But like in the world, like that shit just doesn't matter. It's not really a thing. And so therefore I feel like the fear becomes more paralyzing than when like it doesn't drive me to figure out how to like accomplish a goal or to be the best, quote unquote. It more so just makes me scared or makes me feel like shit or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think the reason I've been thinking about this so much, you know, is just because now I'm around so much more young people, and I don't know if I'll ever have kids. I don't know if you and your lady have talked about that or whatever. But like, there's this thing of like, oh shit, what would I say to my kid to motivate them?
Yeah,
you know, like it was always. I've told the story on this podcast before, but my parents always had this thing of like, you can absolutely quit piano lessons whenever you want, but you have to call the teacher and do it.
Wow, that's interesting.
Which is like when you're 6, you're like, Wow. Yeah. Like there was no way I was calling Mrs. Moxness and being like, Mrs. Moxness, I'm actually not hyped about this anymore.
Wow.
You know, and so that I don't know. I think maybe that plays a part with where I am, what I am, but there's got to be a way through it, and I don't know what it is yet. Yeah. So if you ever find out, tell me.
Yeah, if you figure that out.
If you have a productive conversation with like an 8-year-old, definitely please hit me up immediately afterwards. To switch boats a little bit. To switch boats, is that a phrase? No, maybe not.
It is now.
Yeah. So I realize, and I would imagine there are a lot of people out there that have no idea what the process is to score a film.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I watched just some clips of you working on stuff and some clips of my buddy Julian doing things, and it's like, oh shit, okay. So do you? I guess my question is this: like, do you get the full film with? I mean, obviously it has no music in it, but like, do you get everything right away?
Well, actually, sometimes it does have temp music in it, and it varies as far as like what status I'm getting a project in. So like sometimes I'll get a film that is in a script form, and like and they haven't even started shooting yet, but they want me to start working on like ideas or themes or whatever, and I'm just writing to ideas and basing them on our conversations on like the palette or references or things like that. Okay. And
so you're like scoring a book.
Exactly. Yeah. Fuck. Yeah, for sure. Which I've done that as well. And so like, wow. So you're really just kind of, it's a little bit freeing because then you're just writing to a feeling as more than anything. You're not worried about the technical aspects of like matching the cut or like all of that. And it also helps because if you're able to start writing on a project that early, like I started Dear White People pretty early. They were still shooting when I started writing themes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So by the time they get to cutting the picture, they are starting to at least use some of the music that I've written in that early version of the picture. Okay. So it kind of helps with creating or establishing what the sound is going to be. Because another phase that we might get a film in as a composer is where they have a rough edit of it that's like pretty far from being finished. Maybe it's like the first assembly cut that they've done, but they've been throwing in temp music. And the temp music is like from like, I mean, Hans Zimmer or like James Howard.
So they're using like other people's stuff. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like music from other films or whatever that they feel like is somewhat close to the sound that they want.
Sure.
And sometimes it's not close at all, but they're just like, we just needed something. Sometimes it's like, we love the palette and the textures in this score, but the cue is totally wrong.
Okay.
Or sometimes it's like on When They See Us, a show I just did with Ava DuVernay, they use Cliff Martinez a lot in that score, but they didn't want that sound at all.
Oh shit.
So it was kind of like, okay, well, we like this pace. We like the fact that it has a somewhat electronic sound to it, but it also has like a little bit of an organic feel to it.
Okay.
And then we'll watch through the whole show or the whole movie together and talk through each point where there is music. Sometimes we'll also not have any music in it, and they'll say like, I love music here, and we'll talk about what that should sound like. But either way, once we spotted the scenes and talked about where music should come in, how it should feel, what it should do, then like my process is just kind of throwing paint at the wall at first and seeing what happens and what sticks, and then like eventually, for me, I start with like improvising, and then I find something, and then like then I start creating a beat map and like tempo and then figure out if I need to make adjustments so that I can like match certain cuts. And like sometimes that matters in certain things where like, especially in an action sequence, like every cut is incredibly important because when the music hits on cuts, it kind of adds to the momentum. But with like other more languid type scenes, that doesn't really matter as much, but there might be a moment where I'm like, oh, this melody note should really hit on this cut, or this should hit like right after the cut. And so I'll go through that. And then the one thing is that a lot of times, because I'm working where, for film especially, where they still don't have the edit done, then like I might write a bunch of music, and then they'll come back and say, actually, that scene is like 20 seconds shorter now, or like, or
yes,
yeah, exactly, yeah, or like this doesn't feel good anymore here because like this scene is in a totally different place in the movie, or whatever it is. But then it's just kind of like, shaping it and going back and forth. And then with TV, it's a little more difficult because you really only have like less than a week to turn something around. So
my God.
Yeah, usually it's like we'll watch a show, and then on a Friday, and I have until like the following Friday to turn around a full score, essentially.
This is why you don't sleep.
Yeah, exactly. And because, you're also dealing with the sometimes mercurial nature of the director. So like, if I get it on a Friday and I write all weekend and then deliver my first passes on a Monday, sometimes I don't hear from the director until Tuesday because they're busy or whatever it is, or and sometimes they won't have any notes, but sometimes they'll come back and say like, all of this needs to be different, and then I'll still only have until Friday to get that finished. God. Yeah, so TV can be a little more stressful. Yeah,
I would imagine this probably doesn't happen now at your stage of the game, but did you ever get? I could just imagine situations where like the proxy music that they used was like just terrible.
Oh yeah, that still happens.
Like fight scenes, and you're hearing like big band. Like,
man, well, I mean, because the thing is that it really depends on the editor. Because like a lot of times the editor is picking the temp music, and like sometimes they just have different taste or a different idea of what it should be. Like I remember on Green Book, the first pass of the temp music, the Patrick, the editor, who he was nominated for an Oscar for it. I mean, he's an incredible editor. But as far as like the temp music that he picked, it was something that was like very different than I think a lot of the other people involved thought the sound should be.
Oh shit!
And so it took like Tom Wolfe and Manish Raval, the music supervisors, they did their pass of like the temp music, and it totally changed the feel of the film and everything.
Oh wow, okay.
But there are definitely still sometimes where, the editor is just trying something, or sometimes they'll like cut together two pieces of music because they want it to change feels in the middle of the scene because of what happens in the scene, but they'll like mash together two pieces of music that don't go together at all, or whatever it is. But
Slayer and like Bright Eyes. Right?
Yes.
That's amazing. which one makes you more comfortable? Like, it sounds like you get both situations where you're kind of like free to just be like, all right, well, here's what I'll try and I'll see if they like it.
Yeah.
Or like, and I'm assuming you probably also have directors that are like, here's the exact kind of thing I want.
Yeah.
Like, which one is an easier start for you?
Having the freedom and flexibility, just because no matter what, even if a director is like, this is exactly the sound that I want. Like I worked on another documentary once where they were like, this temp music is pretty perfect, but we want you to do your thing. And every time I wrote something, they kept being like, well, the temp music really feels like good for these reasons. Yeah. And it was very simple. It was like a pad kind based score. There wasn't much going on to it. I would even write a cue that was pretty incredibly similar, and they were still like, but it doesn't feel the same. And I'm just like, it's just like one note really or one tone that's kind of hanging out. And so I think whenever somebody starts from a place of like, this is exactly what I want, that's usually what is when it's difficult, because like it's never going to be exactly what they have in their mind, because I can't read their mind,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Green Book situation was probably a little tricky too, because you have an exact aesthetic that you're doing. It's like you're literally doing a movie about a musician.
Yeah, for all the piano stuff. Like fortunately for the score itself, they gave me a lot of autonomy to decide how that was going to sound. But with the piano stuff, my charge to myself was to try to get it as exact as possible to like the original recordings. Yeah.
And so you were transcribing basically all that, because there was no written anything.
Yeah, no sheet music. Yeah.
I'm still amazed, and you've spoken about this in a ton of interviews, so I'll let everyone else dive into those for details. But I'm curious, just the quick rundown is that you not only wrote the score and learned and transcribed and all that stuff and taught it to the musicians in the movie, taught Mahershala how to play, like everything. And shot a lot of it. Like, what was your time frame for that?
So I had about, I maybe had about 3 weeks or so to learn the music. Yeah.
I heard one tune. I was like, I think it would take me a month to learn that one tune.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. I was practicing like 10 hours a day, and like, it was serious. But I had 3 weeks to kind of learn it, because I had to record it 2 months before they started shooting.
Okay.
So that we had enough time, about 2 months. So they had enough time to like, for Mahershala to rehearse with it, so the other actors could listen to it, so they could figure out what they wanted to shoot from it and all that kind of stuff. But from the time I got the gig to when I had to start shooting it with them, that was about like 3 months. And so I had 3 months to like teach Mahershala, and with him, we really focused just on the choreography and all that kind of stuff, especially because for a lot of the intricate stuff, we knew that was going to be me playing, and so there's no need to like try to get him to be
there's still a scene or two where it's like he's pretty on point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, to be honest, I don't know how much of it is like, if you see hands playing the piano and it's something like, that's definitely me. But if you see like shots of him from far away, or simple melodies, like there's happy talk, like things like that. Yeah, that's probably him playing, or probably him at least, moving with the music. And it was pretty incredible to see how much he was focused on his posture, or how he sat down at the piano, or like, again, our process is he would he had all the recordings, but then he would have me videotape myself playing through everything, so he could watch that on repeat. And then the day of a scene, we would get together in his room, and I would play keyboard in front of him so that he could just watch me over and over again playing it. And yeah, it was pretty baffling to see how he could be pretending to be this other person and like be at an instrument he's never played before, like memorizing lines, like all these things, and still have this air about him that he was able to maintain.
I'm just gonna get it.
Yeah,
because I know there's the one scene where it's like you look at the hands close up, but then it pans out and it's just him.
Yeah, and
like I was trying real hard to see like, all right, this is like how in is he? And it seems like he's playing it.
But that one, that's me, and that's wow. I mean, at this point, I guess we can talk about, but it's all head replacement. So it's like,
holy
so if
shit.
You watch the movie and you see, like, if you look for if you just look at the head, essentially, you can kind of see in the neck area, like an edit essentially.
But
Where
it's
like
so fucking close. Though.
Yeah,
and no one's
it's-
looking for that.
exactly. Yeah.
Man, that's amazing. Holy shit. Yeah, because I was like, dude, this dude learned how to play some crazy shit in like a very little time.
Yeah.
Because I remember you were like, yeah, our first lesson we learned to scale. And I was like, bro, he went from scale to like shit I can't do. And like,
Kris is the best teacher ever.
like, holy shit, what am I missing here? Oh my God, man. Like when you're working like, 10, 12, 14, whatever hour days, like with one goal in mind, like, do you find any corollaries for how you keep yourself sane in those situations versus, because you said you toured for probably 5-6 years pretty heavily.
Yeah.
I would imagine there's some correlation between like, how do I center myself here? Like, I guess, what do you do to like not go nuts?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess like, it's interesting because when I'm actually doing it, that's when I feel most sane or most like dialed in. Like when I'm practicing and writing music and I'm dialed in, like it's hard for me, like I lose track of time, like all that kind of stuff. And I think that comes from practicing so much when I was a kid and just like what that was like. But as far as my sanity outside of the context of that, I think that's what's difficult is like anytime I wasn't playing or anytime I'm not writing is when it's very easy for me to be like, oh shit, like maybe I should have practiced more. Like maybe you
have time to think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the moment that I'm trying to get better at shutting out noise and all that kind of stuff. Because when I'm actually doing the work, that's when I feel happiest. That's when I feel great and all that kind of stuff. But anytime I'm outside of that, I start, like you said, thinking and second guessing it. Yeah.
Do you get to where it's like you shut off thinking and then you just totally, you can't? Because I run into that sometimes where I'm like I'll have like a week off or something. And I'm like, I don't even know what to think about right now.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's just hard for me to shut it off though. I feel like even when we go on vacation, my fiance and I, like I'll still, the first day I'll be good with like sitting around and like watching Netflix, not doing anything. And then day 2, I'm like, oh, I kind of want to check my email and I kind of want to like read this thing that I'm supposed to read.
I would imagine she appreciates that.
No, not at all. Yeah. I think that's the thing that I'm trying to get better at is like that part of the balance, especially because what ends up happening is if I'm not doing the work and I'm just sitting there stressed about it, then like I'm also not being very present there. And then I start doing work and I feel bad about not being able to relax. And so trying to be like, I've been trying to work on meditation and all that kind of stuff.
I was just going to ask how deeply you've dove into that.
Yeah, like I've been going in and out of it. It's something that like when I'm really into it, I'm good at doing it every day and all of that. But like it's kind of, I've just recently in the last week gotten back to doing it every day. But it's still something that like, it's a practice that I haven't made it a habit of yet.
Yeah. So the last episode I did was Mark Juliana's, and he's shown me so much fucking shit because he's super deep. Like he's not even a meditator, but he's super deep into the Eastern thought process and the presence and all this stuff. But it seems to be just a mindset of presence and like knowing what your body's going through and just being able to identify it. Like that was something like dealing with like the anxiety stuff. It's like, it almost seems like whatever emotion you're having, if you have trouble with it, like if you go into this thought process of like, let me literally try and describe where this is coming from, it almost like kind of just disappears. It's weird. I mean, it's not meant to be a fix, but it's just kind of a byproduct of like, like if you're like, oh man, I feel like I should be working on something. Yeah. Taking a deep breath and going like, okay, where do I feel that?
Like in your actual body.
Yeah. Like where is the physical response of this coming from?
Yeah.
And like sometimes it's not even in your head, which is the craziest shit.
Yeah.
Like you'll dive into like, damn, like my arms feel this.
Yeah.
It's that seems to be like the kind of the artistic savior these days. I've noticed that a lot of people who used to tour or who kind of get deep into either film scoring or writing or whatever, it's like that shit seems to be one of the few things that works.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I wish that it was something that, we just kind of like talked about more, taught like in general. I mean, going back to what you're saying about like breath work, something that I don't think we ever think about, especially as keyboard players and musicians or pianists. Like it's not as required as like any instrument where they're actually like using your breath and like, but it helps so much with like being calm or centered or balanced and all that kind of stuff. And same thing with like just dealing with stress. I feel like it's the people that I don't know. I feel like conservatories should talk more about like the stress that comes with this job.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's, I mean, I'll save my listeners even more college hate because I give plenty of it. But I mean, like, man, even in just regular schools, like even in the education system, like I know in more progressive cities like LA and New York, they're starting to do this a little bit where they'll talk to, you know, little kids about presents and stuff like that. But like, man, that kind of shit would save a lot of heartache maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's and you're right, especially in music, it's like getting people to realize that like the things that you dream about, like touring and even film scoring, it's like there's a lot happening mentally.
Yeah.
Like
and emotionally and
like geez, and you have to be able to tap into it because you won't be successful if you can't. You know. So I've noticed, and I know, well, I'm going to give you one or two more things because I know we got to wrap it up pretty quick. You've been a part of some really fucking amazing, like socially conscious films and TV shows and stuff like that.
For sure.
Has this been something that you kind of like, did it happen coincidentally where you were just like, you were killing and they hired you, or were you kind of like aiming for like, no, these are the projects that I really want to take on?
I think a combination of both. I mean, I feel like in the beginning, I was mainly just working on whatever came, and that happened to be like these documentaries and a lot of like sports documentaries.
You did the Kobe stuff.
Yeah, and I found after doing that, like those producers ended up making 2 other documentaries and a TV show that I worked on about sports. And so like at first it was just kind of random stuff, but still it was stuff that I believed in the message on or cared about. And then Dear White People happened, and that was like kind of the first thing that allowed it so that other people were reaching out to me or that I was getting opportunities. And then I think from then I was able to start making some sort of selections on what I wanted and what I didn't want to do. And I've just always I've always had this thought or feeling that like if I look back in years from now or even a couple of years from now on what I was working on and feel any sort of like shame around it or embarrassment around it, then I don't want to do it and I shouldn't do it. And I just happen to care so much about so many social justice issues that I think it turns out that those projects are the projects I've been saying yes to. And I feel like there have been a bunch of projects, especially lately, that I've been offered that I've said no to, but I think for those reasons, because I didn't connect to whatever the story was trying to say or whatever was happening. And I've now seen that for the most part, I feel really passionate when something has some sort of social justice vibe to it. Yeah.
Well, it definitely like having a meaning behind something. I mean, it not only probably helps the music that you're creating, but also helps the relationship with the instruments that you're playing too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's like more of a place to write from, and I also think being a musician and living in the world that we live in right now, it kind of always feels for me like it's easy to kind of be like, what am I doing as a musician to like contribute or help with like how crazy the world is, and like writing a piece of music is very different than people that are like out there reporting in the middle of Syria, or like somebody that's even like a neuroscientist that's trying to cure some sort of ailment, and like those things feel so much more important. And I know that music is also very important and helpful in healing and all that, but I think it is a lot of times when it's talking about something very real, whether it's like social justice or even like talking about like depression or suicide or whatever it is, like whenever it's talking about something that has depth to it, that's when it's easier to connect to.
Yeah. How has I mean, and again, this might be my ignorance of the film scoring scene, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of young, amazing African-American film scorers. maybe that's an easy one. How has that kind of made your experience unique as opposed to other people who are kind of in your same field?
Yeah, I think I don't know, it's an interesting thing that I kind of like, it can be a little bit of I don't know, like a mind fuck, to be honest, like thinking about it too much. I feel like on one hand, it's part of what's afforded me a lot of opportunities. You know, I think that it's interesting. I was watching some TV show that had an episode about affirmative action, essentially, and like, and the black character was getting frustrated that he was chosen, that he might have been chosen because he was black. And this older black man was like, yeah, like that's why you were chosen. It's like, but like get over that and like and prove that you belong to be there. Like, cause that's what it's really about. Cause at the end of the day, yes, that might get you the opportunity, but that's kind of, there's always a reason why somebody gets the opportunity. Like there are people that get opportunities because of nepotism. There are people that get opportunities because like they were a nicer person. There are people that get opportunities for whatever it is. So if like that's part of the reason why you got the opportunity, I think that like part of me feels very thankful for it. Part of me also feels frustrated because it then feels like I have to prove myself even more because like just the other day I was talking to somebody and I got into the Sundance Composers Lab and they were like, yeah, well, like, it's really great that you got in. I mean, I'm sure it also helped that like, you know, like you're a jazz musician and that you're black because like, you know, they always need that. And I was like, that diminishes like, you know, any value that I have or skills that I have. And so then it's on me to like, it's like a chip I have on my shoulder of like, now I have to prove myself even more.
It's a weird responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. And especially when I know a lot of other young black composers and musicians that maybe have the same skills or at least like the same level of skills, maybe different skill sets, but are incredible musicians themselves and are also starting to get opportunities as well. But on the flip side of that is also how much you're pigeonholed possibly, you know, and like how
I was curious if you ever felt like maybe you're going to be like, it's like that role is going to be the thing. You know?
I feel like early on I was doing all these sports documentaries that all that music was actually more inspired by Cliff Martinez and like had mostly like analog synths and strings and all that kind of stuff.
And you're probably free as fuck.
yeah. And, but then I would go into meetings to talk about possibly working on projects and they'd always be like, well, we don't really have anything that needs a jazz sound right now because like that was what they were always assuming based on, like my background, but also I think a lot of that has to do with like what I look like. Yeah. And then also on top of that, most of the projects that I was getting, even up until like last year even, I would get so many calls for projects that wanted like a hip hop score or like just last year I was reached out to about a project and they were like, yeah, we want like a modern New York sound, but like north of 125th Street. Like, what does that mean?
Fuck.
And I think like all those things have like people coming to me for a lot of that stuff has nothing to do with the music I've created before. It just has to do with the fact that I'm black. And that's the kind of stuff that, you know, you start to struggle with like, do I take this opportunity because like I'm not getting very many opportunities right now, or do I wait and hold out to try to hope that something else comes along? And I've been fortunate where like I think the only reason why I've been able to overcome some of these like possible pigeonholes is because of honestly a lot of like the black directors that have given me the opportunity to write some different kind of music. Like Justin Simeon for Dear White People, all that music is mostly like classical and there is a lot of jazz in that too, but a lot of it's inspired by Ravel and Debussy and Chopin, and same thing with Ava on When They See Us. Like there's nothing, I think it was important for her that I was African-American because I would then bring something different to the score or they would, but as far as the sound of the score, like
music's not that.
Yeah, you wouldn't listen to that and say like that sounds quote unquote black, whatever that means. But because of the sound of that music, now there are other shows that are like, oh, Kris can possibly do this kind of stuff. Or like before I got that show, there were times where I was up for a score that needed like just simple piano and strings. And there was a bit of hesitance to hire me for that, even though like
they didn't think that was your niche.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you know,
that's a weird spot to be in.
Yeah, but again, being fortunate to have these directors that give me the space to write something in those veins has been helpful.
Well, it's fucking amazing, man. And you've done a lot of really great shit, and that's like the lamest way I could possibly say that.
That means a lot coming from you.
Yeah, thank you. Last question, very quickly. The fact that you've, I think, done maybe 10 things that are on my top 20 things I want to do in my life list. Like you got to hang and play for Obama. You've played with and written with Kanye and like Q-Tip and all these amazing people. And you have people like Ava and Kobe basically like on Twitter being like, this is the fucking guy. What's the and maybe maybe you're just good, but what's the thing that you're like, all right, here's I haven't done this yet. What do I want to do?
I think a couple of things. One, work on like on a big, maybe even like superhero type of film or like big like
that'd be so killing.
Yeah, and mainly just because it's kind of an extension of what we're talking about. Like there aren't that many Black composers.
Yeah.
There's never been a Black composer that's worked on any of those kinds of projects.
Sure.
There's never been a Black composer that's worked on like a project over like $100 million, and like so trying to work on something like that, but also working on something that's like just some sort of like cultural phenomenon as far as like the music goes, which I think, you know, you have to have the kind of film that allows you to do that. But I feel like, I don't know, I think about the scores that like Trent Reznor does, or that Johnny Greenwood maybe even more so does. And like he's given so much space to do something incredibly unique. And the film is like, ends up having this big box office success, but like the movie doesn't really seem like it's anything that would be trying to get that. Because I think that like the big budget tentpole films I grew up watching and like, you know, like for that reason, but those aren't the films that I usually like want to go out and see. Like the films that I want to go out and see are like usually the ones that feel a little bit more indie and feel a little bit more like character studies and all that kind of stuff. And so trying to do a project like that allows me to like write a very, very weird and different score, I think would be fun too.
Yeah, I hope I get to hear it when it happens, and I wish you the best. Everything you're doing is fucking amazing.
Man, thank you, Nick.
Thank you for being a part of this.
Yeah, man, thank you.
Dude, take care.
All right, you too, man. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to episode 9 of the Grid Kids podcast. Again, I'd like to give a super big thank you to our sponsor, Spectrasonics. Keep an ear open and an eye out for my latest Instagram video where I take their bass software Trillion for a little test drive. I've played the clip I recorded for a few different people now, and unless I showed them the actual video of me playing, they would not believe me that this wasn't an actual bass guitar doing the tracking. Trillion has somehow figured out a way to make incredibly realistic bass patches and also synth bass patches, and both of them are extremely easy to edit and to play. So check the clip out at my IG page at Nicholas T. Semrad. And until next time, everyone, thank you for listening.